I'm Laura from Garden Sanity, and today I'm going to show you how to easily plant perennials. This is great if you're a beginning gardener especially, because a lot of times you'll see videos and you'll read articles that tell you a lot of tools you need, a lot of soil amendments you need. It's actually much simpler than that. So this is how to plant perennials the easy way. And the first thing I'm going to talk about is tools. So a lot of you probably buy these common diggers. I mean, this is sort of the first tool everybody ends up getting when they start gardening, and this is great for digging small perennials in soil. But I'm going to show you a tool that's even better to get. So this is good if you have very easy soil that you can easily dig, but a lot of us don't. I, for one, do not. I've got soil that's got roots in it, rocks in it, all kinds of stuff. So this is called a snake tongue trowel. And this is by DeWit. I bought this on Amazon. It's considered an heirloom tool because it's made of steel. It's got a nice wood base. I'm probably going to have this forever. And what's nice about it is, get a little closer so you can see, it's got a very sharp tongue, which is why they call it snake tongue. And that's a knife. So if you're digging down and you come to a root, it's going to really nicely slice that for you. If you're digging down and you don't quite slice through the root, you can easily, in the most cases, you can grab the root and you can really go at it with the knife part, and that's going to do fine for you. So this is more my preferred tool, and I like it for several reasons. Not only is it good for perennials, it's also good for digging bulbs. As you notice, it's a lot skinnier and thinner widthwise, so to dig bulb holes, for the most part, you only need something like this to dig a nice round hole for yourself. So this is a good tool to have, and this is what I use for digging for smaller perennials when I'm going to plant those. This, pruners. You do need them occasionally. If, like I said, you run into a root and you can't really cut it that well, use your pruners to cut the roots out. Not a bad idea. This is actually a really old pair of pruners. You can see they're kind of even rusty and stuff, but this is what I use for getting roots. I save it for that purpose because I'm not that worried about them, keeping them clean or whatever. I do rinse them off occasionally, but this is what will also work well for getting hard roots out. And you want to remove the roots. You don't want to just leave them there if they're underneath where you're trying to make a planting hole, because you want the plants of the perennial to be able to spread out as much as possible. So, pruners. This is what you also want. This is a great little petite shovel. It's made by Bond. And I've had this for years. As you can see, it's quite beat up on the handle. You can tell it's definitely been used, but it is still sharp as ever. It's got a nice edge, comes to a point, makes digging effortless. Now, I'm small, I'm petite. I'm not going to want to use a full-size shovel. However, my husband's 6'4", uses a full-size shovel. There are still times he will use this because it's able to get into smaller spaces when you're trying to maybe dig a hole around some other shrubs. So men, this might be a good tool to have in your toolbox as well. But this is great. I will put links to all of these things below in the description area. Gloves. You definitely want some gloves. You're going to get kind of dirty. I know there's many people that don't like gardening with gloves. I swear by them. They protect your hands. If there's any bugs or something, you're going to avoid getting any kind of little bug bites, anything like that. Great to have. So here's a quick tip before you plant. The morning you're going to go plant, go outside and water the potted plants you're about to plant. And this way, the plant is nice and moist. It'll be much easier to remove from the container, but it also will have absorbed a lot of water. Just makes it off to a better start when you're planting it in the ground. You're going to water once it's planted as well, but this is a good tip to start out with, just to make sure you've got a nice, healthy, watered plant before you start. There's one more thing I don't want to forget to mention, I almost did, is a root starter. And that's something like Biotone or Osmocote, something that is granular. Sometimes they can be liquid. I think that that's optional, and I'll tell you why. Before your perennials that you've just purchased from the nursery or garden center get to the nursery or garden center, they are taken care of like you wouldn't believe. They are given nutrients and fertilizer and the perfect soil and sun conditions, daylight conditions. They are in prime condition to arrive to you and get into your garden space. So it's possible your own soil isn't that great, but the soil that is holding the roots together is already perfect. So it doesn't need extra fertilizer, extra compost, soil amendments. It really doesn't. And there's a lot of gardeners, and I'm in this camp as well, that tell you that your first year of planting a perennial, just plant it, let it be, and the following season start with fertilizing. Now, another thing you need to be careful of is some perennials prefer lean soil, and you'll see that on the plant tag. And if that's the case, you don't want to add any kind of fertilizer to it, because that's maybe going to stunt its growth a little bit. It could make it have more green leaves rather than flowers. It all depends. So read those plant tags carefully. So what I use Biotone. That's primarily what I use. I sprinkle it in the bottom of the hole, and then I work it into the soil. And that's a very gentle, slow release organic fertilizer and a soil amendment that's going to actually provide some nutrients to the roots. And that's all I use 90% of the time. So with that said, let's get started. So I'm going to demonstrate how to plant perennials by using the shooting star hellebores I recently planted. And I filmed myself planting them so that I could shoot this video for you. So the first thing I'm doing is I'm removing the mulch around where I want to plant. This may seem like a silly step to mention, but you'd be surprised. There are people that think they can just dig and the mulch won't, if you want it to look nice, remove the mulch first. Next, you're going to dig a hole. And in this case, I'm using a shovel because these plants are a little bit bigger in bigger pots. But later in the video, I'll show you how I plant smaller pots just using a digger or a snake tongue trowel. Now, when you're making a hole to plant perennials, what you want to keep in mind, and the main point really of all of this, is make the hole much wider than the plant is, than what the pot is, because you're going to refill around that plant that you put in the hole. You're going to refill it with the soil you just removed, and that is the best way to get your plant off to a good start. So wider hole than the plant. So as you're shoveling, you want to move the soil aside, and again, that's another reason to remove the mulch way far away from where you're going to be planting and digging, because you're going to end up making a pile of soil. In my case, I put the soil in a bucket. It's just easier for me to put it back in later, which I'll show you in a moment. If you come up upon any roots, use your pruners or the snake tongue trowel, whatever's easiest. Chop those out. Make sure you're giving your plant a nice hole. And now I'm adding Biotone starter fertilizer. As you see, I put it in the hole, and then with my gloved hand, I move it around, not only into the soil at the bottom of the hole, but up the sides as well, because as you know from when you pull the plants out, there's roots all the way up until the top of where the crown of the plant is. You also want to make sure that the plant fits in the hole properly, and there's two things to make sure of. One, that it's not too low, because if it's too low, the roots might drown in water. If it's too high, the roots might not be able to get down as far to get water, and then they're going to dry out. So you want to make sure that it's even with the soil, that the soil line and soil level of a plant in the pot is even with the soil in the garden. You also want to make sure that you've got the nicest part of it facing forward. I mean, why not, right? Over time, the plant's going to develop, and it hopefully will look nice from all sides, but make sure that you've got the nicest side facing front that you can enjoy. So before you plant the plant, you want to tease the roots apart, especially if it's root bound. Now, these plants were exceptionally root bound because I left them in pots ever since I bought them in the spring, so that's my bad. So you take it out of the pot, you hold it gently with one hand, and I'm going to use my snake tongue trowel to tease the roots out. I'm making several little holes. I'm pulling the roots as I'm doing it. If the bottom is completely root bound, you can actually pull that off and toss it. You want roots that are going to expand shortly after you plant them. If you leave it all root bound and you just plant it in the ground without teasing anything out, it's going to take a long time for those roots to eventually escape the root ball and start growing for you. So it's a little tip, but it has big results. So set the plant in the hole, the side you prefer, and now you want to fill in all around the plant with the soil that you removed. Again, use the native soil that's already in your garden. Don't add compost, don't add other things, because that's actually going to mess up the soil a little bit. Right now, your native soil is going to be the best soil you can use for these new perennials. Let them get used to all the soil. If you have a perennial that's planted with all these soil amendments, but next to it is just regular soil, your garden is just going to be all topsy-turvy. And while I'm putting the soil in, I'll just tell you, I do use compost. I use it either in the spring, all over the bed, or I use it in the fall, just around the crown of many of my perennials and shrubs. And using it around the crown for the fall will not only help it soak into the soil with all the rain and snow or whatever weather we have in the winter, but it also acts as almost a protective mulch to protect the plants a little bit from drying out. And that way you get the compost around your plants, but you don't need to put them in the hole as you're actually planting them right now. After you have all the soil in, tamp it down really well. What I do besides tamping with my hands, because I don't know, maybe I'm a little weak, is I actually will gently use my feet. I won't tamp it all the way on top of the plant, but I'll go around the sort of the outer perimeter of the plant just to make sure it's tamped down well in the soil. Next I'm going to water, and there's a little trick to watering. What I'm going to do is I'm not yet replacing the mulch around the plant. I am going to give this a good soaking just to get the soil all wet. And as you see, I'm doing it to the point where there's a little bit of puddling. After I do that, I'm going to wait until all that sinks down into the soil. Then I'm going to move the mulch back into place. And by doing that, now I've got the soil underneath the mulch completely saturated, which is great. However, now I'm going to take my watering can and I'm going to water again, watering the mulch to now connect that with the soil and the plant, and we're all one big happy family. Now let me show you the same process but done with a very small potted perennial, the kind that you might get from a mail order nursery, for example. So now you see how easy it is to plant perennials, whether it's a larger perennial or it's a small perennial. I hope this helps you. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments. And until next time, happy gardening.